The Wild West is a renowned period in American history for numerous reasons, including wagon trails, gold prospecting, ghost towns, and constant conflicts. These elements symbolize life on the Western frontier. However, the most representative symbols of this era are the outlaws and the numerous criminals who brought violence and chaos to the Western frontier. For the most part, wagon caravans, trains, or horseback riders were not safe in the untamed lands of the American West, largely due to the high risk of encountering cattle rustlers, bandits, and other notorious outlaws seeking fame, or rather, infamy, on the frontier. Many stories about the desperados and criminals of the Old West revolve around the reckless lifestyle of being an outlaw. This makes sense given the culture and lifestyle of westward expansion in the 19th century, yet it is still surprising how many men and women abandon lawful ways to join the ranks of outlaws. To delve deeper into the lives of these Old West criminals and the origins of their misdeeds, here's the next video in a series detailing infamous men and women of the Wild West who thrived in the heyday of scum and villainy on the Western frontier. Introducing William Brosius, better known as Curly Bill, one of the most infamous and feared outlaws not only in Arizona, but in the entire Wild West. The early life of William Brosius is shrouded in mystery, with little known about his childhood and early adulthood. Most historical evidence suggests he was born around 1845 in or near Crawfordsville, Indiana. From Indiana, Brosius is believed to have traveled west into Missouri or Kansas, where in 1860, at just 15 years old, he began his life as a rustler and ruffian. It is unclear if the young outlaw was born with the name he died with, which adds to the mystery of his origins. One account tells of a young man named William B. Graham, a former cowboy born in Missouri who moved to Texas to work for major cattle drivers. After his time with the Lone Star outfits ended, he moved on to Kansas, where he became known as a gunfighter called Curly Bill. These details come from an old publication called the Encyclopedia of the Old West, based on a report by historian Dennis McLaughlin, who believes Brosius and Graham were the same person. However, further investigation reveals that William B. Graham and Curly Bill were not the same individual. Graham was killed in 1887 after a gunfight with Deputy Sheriff James D. Howe and is buried in Young, Arizona. Another historian, Robert Marshall Utley, presented evidence that William Brosius was actually a wanted criminal named William Curly Bill Bresneal, active in El Paso, Texas. This connection traces back to a series of events starting in the mid-1870s when Jesse Evans founded the Boys, a gang of renegades plundering New Mexico. Two of the gang members were Robert Martin and Curly Bill Bresneal, who participated in the Lincoln County War, a bloody conflict involving Jesse Evans's gang and their rivals, the Regulators, which included Billy the Kid. Martin and Bresneal later joined the Cochise County Cowboys, part of Tombstone's criminal enterprise in the early 1880s. The connections between the men and events suggest that William Bresneal was one of Curly Bill's aliases, just as William B. Graham or William Brosius might have been. Regardless of his many aliases or mysterious origins, the man known as Curly Bill left the New Mexico Territory as the Lincoln County War peaked, heading east to El Paso. There, he committed his first major crime, robbing a local outfit and killing a man in the process. Caught by the Texas Rangers, he was jailed in El Paso to await trial. Prosecutor James Albert Zabriskie secured a guilty verdict, but Curly Bill escaped before being transferred to a Texas penitentiary. Fleeing further west into the Arizona Territory in 1878, he began using the name William Brosius. In Arizona, Brosius used his knowledge as a cowboy to gain employment on a cattle drive to the San Carlos Apache Indian Reservation. Later, he moved to Cochise County, befriending the infamous Sheriff Johnny Bean. Bean saw potential in Curly Bill and hired him as a tax collector, a role that involved extorting taxes from fellow cattle rustlers. Unwittingly, Brosius became deeply involved in the cattle rustling business himself. Brosius's dark side emerged through his association with the Cochise County Cowboys. Known for his mean, drunken behavior, he would fire rounds during church sermons or forcefully strip and humiliate Mexican villagers. His infamous actions culminated in a major gunfight in downtown Tombstone, Arizona, on October 28, 1880. On that evening, Brosius and his fellow outlaws, drunk and unruly, were firing their guns in the air. Town Marshal Frederick G. White confronted them, demanding their disarmament. When White tried to take Brocius's pistol, a struggle ensued and the gun discharged, shooting White in the leg. Witness Wyatt Earp subdued and arrested Brocius, who was then jailed. Curly Bill's days as a cattle rustler were over, but his notorious career as a gunfighter was just beginning. Marshal Fred White met a much darker fate. He was initially declared stable by the Tombstone doctor, but his condition worsened as his gunshot wounds became life-threatening. Meanwhile, Curly Bill Brocius feared for his life with every passing moment, knowing that White was not only a popular officer, but also a respected citizen. Curly Bill felt that a lynch mob was imminent, even though he insisted that the gun discharged accidentally. By this time, Wyatt Earp had reassessed his feelings towards Brocius. After reflecting on the events of October 28th, Earp believed in Brocius's innocence. As the deputy sheriff of Pima County, Earp teamed up with George Collins and other notable figures of the Old West to transfer Curly Bill to Tucson. This move was made to protect him from the threat of lynching while he awaited trial. On October 30th, Fred White succumbed to his injuries. However, before dying, he made an official statement declaring his belief in Brocius's innocence, asserting that the gun discharged accidentally. This belief was held consistently from the moment he was shot until his death 48 hours later. During Curly Bill's murder trial, his defense successfully demonstrated that his gun could discharge accidentally. They showed that the gun still had 5 bullets out of 6, arguing that if Brocius had intended to shoot, he would have fired multiple rounds. With Wyatt Earp supporting Fred White's dying testimony, it was almost certain that Brocius would be acquitted. After 2 months in jail, Brocius was acquitted of all charges in December 1880. One might think that surviving such a close brush with death would lead Brocius to abandon his criminal ways, but this was not the case. Curly Bill continued his life of crime, driven by a thirst for alcohol and a propensity for violence. Less than 3 months after his acquittal in March 1881, Curly Bill and Johnny Ringo were at a saloon in Maxey, Arizona, called O'Neill and Franklin's. Chaos erupted when a drunken cowboy named Dick Lloyd shot one of the patrons and then rode his horse into the bar. The situation escalated, and upon re-entering the saloon on horseback, Lloyd was shot dead by Curly Bill and 11 other patrons. To apologize for the incident, the co-owner, O'Neill, took the fall for Lloyd's murder, but was found not guilty. A few months later, in late May 1881, Curly Bill was drinking with other Cochise cowboys when an altercation broke out. Jim Wallace, a major figure from the Lincoln County War, insulted Billy Breckinridge, a deputy marshal and one of Curly Bill's close allies. Despite Wallace's attempts to apologize, Curly Bill wouldn't let it go and threatened Wallace. In a desperate move, Wallace shot Curly Bill in the face, injuring his cheek and neck. Wallace was arrested but faced no punishment as the court ruled in favor of self-defense. The following months of Curly Bill's life are heavily disputed by historians. It is uncertain whether he was involved in significant events leading up to the gunfight at the OK Corral. One such event was the shootings of Bill Leonard and Harry Head, and the subsequent retaliation murders of their killers, the Haslett brothers. In July 1881, Leonard and Head, both Cochise cowboys, were killed during an attempted robbery of a general store owned by the Haslett brothers in Eureka, New Mexico. The Hasletts, skilled gunslingers themselves, managed to kill Leonard and Head. The news reached Cochise County, and several members of the cowboy gang, possibly led by Curly Bill, sought revenge. They reportedly stormed the Haslett brothers' shop and killed them in cold blood. But no witnesses could confirm Curly Bill's involvement. Another event in July 1881 was the Skeleton Canyon Massacre. Details of Curly Bill's involvement remain unclear, but the period was marked by continued violence and lawlessness in Cochise County. On a lazy afternoon, Curly Bill Brocius, a notorious outlaw, learned about a silver transfer taking place in Skeleton Canyon. This canyon, located on the modern-day border of Arizona and New Mexico, sits in the middle of the Pelincillo mountain range. Rumors were circulating that a band of Mexican smugglers was using the canyon to transport their silver bullion from the Animas Valley to the San Simon Valley. This setting made it an ideal spot for an ambush, and Curly Bill, along with his gang, swiftly rode to Skeleton Canyon. A few days later, around 20 Cochise cowboys ambushed the Mexican smugglers. Several smugglers were killed, and the gang seized at least $4,000 worth of stock and silver bullion. Some reports suggest that the remaining smugglers were tortured before the cowboys fled west. The following month, Curly Bill allegedly sold some of the stolen Mexican cattle to Newman Old Man Clanton, a well-known Arizona farmer and father of several Cochise cowboys. However, Old Man Clanton's possession of the cattle was short-lived. He, along with Jim Crane and a few other cowboys, was ambushed by Mexican rurales led by Captain Carrillo. The cattle were then returned to Comandante Nuri, and this event became known as the Guadalupe Canyon Massacre. Despite reports of Curly Bill delivering stolen cattle to Clanton, it is unlikely he participated in the Skeleton Canyon Massacre or the Hazlitt brothers' murders. In October 1881, George Parsons, a member of an American Indian scouting party, saw Brocious at the McLaury brothers' ranch. Parsons noted that Brocious was still recovering from gunshot wounds to his cheek and neck, sustained 6 weeks earlier, making it improbable that he could have been involved in such criminal activities. Nonetheless, Curly Bill resumed his criminal activities shortly thereafter. Less than 3 months after the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral, he returned to stagecoach robbing. On January 6, 1882, Curly Bill and his gang ambushed a Tombstone Bisbee stagecoach, robbing it of its wealth. The next day they struck again, robbing the Tombstone Benson stagecoach line. Fed up with Curly Bill's continued crimes, Deputy U.S. Marshal Wyatt Earp pursued him but failed to capture him. Curly Bill's luck ran out when he returned to Tombstone on March 17, 1882. The next day, Morgan Earp was assassinated, and suspicion fell on Curly Bill. Despite allegations from Marietta Duarte, wife of fellow Cochise cowboy Pete Spence, that Curly Bill was involved in Morgan Earp's death, he was acquitted due to lack of admissible evidence. Curly Bill's seemingly endless string of escapes came to an end on March 24, 1882. While camping in the Whetstone Mountains with his gang, including Pony Deal, Frank Patterson, Johnny Barnes, Bill Johnson, and the Hicks and Lyle brothers, they were discovered by Wyatt Earp and his posse, including Doc Holliday, Turkey Creek Johnson, Sherman McMaster, and Texas Jack Vermillion. In the ensuing gunfight, Curly Bill and his gang were outmatched. Wyatt Earp's relentless fire caused the gang to scatter. Despite being outnumbered, Earp's posse managed to injure several gang members, including Milt Hicks and Johnny Barnes. Although the details of the final confrontation are dramatic, the relentless pursuit by Wyatt Earp and his posse ultimately brought an end to Curly Bill Brocious's criminal reign in the Old West. Just as the cowboys were about to fire their final rounds, Wyatt Earp delivered a decisive blow. Curly Bill Brocious aimed a shotgun at Earp from about 50 feet away. This was ironic, considering Earp had protected Brocious from lynch mobs in Pima County just a year and a half earlier. Despite Curly Bill's aim, he missed. Earp, positioned behind his horse, retaliated with his own 10-gauge shotgun. His buckshot hit Brocious in the gut with such force that it nearly severed him in two. Curly Bill stumbled backward and fell into Iron Springs, dead. Following Brocious's death, Earp and his companions, the Vendetta Riders, were forced to retreat. Despite struggling to mount his horse due to a loose belt of rounds, Earp successfully led his group back down the Whetstone Mountains. The fate of Curly Bill's body is a topic of debate among historians. Some believe Wyatt Earp himself took Brocious's body after the shootout. This theory is supported by Fred J. Dodge, an undercover detective for Wells Fargo, who claimed that Earp took the body to Frank Patterson's ranch on the Babocamari River and buried it there. Another historian, John Flood, disagrees. He believes that the surviving Cochise cowboys retrieved Brocious's body and buried it on property owned by Frank Stillwell, another outlaw connected to the Earps. Since Curly Bill's grave has never been found, a third theory emerged. Some suggest that Brocious survived his injuries. This theory is fueled by twin articles in the Tombstone Nugget and the Tombstone Epitaph, which offered large rewards for evidence of Brocious's survival. However, these rewards were never claimed, and most historians consider it unlikely that Brocious could have survived such severe injuries. Brocious was a notorious outlaw who consistently evaded the law and survived numerous gunfights. If he had survived, it is likely he would have reemerged. At the time of his death, he wasn't officially wanted in Arizona, but was despised by the Earp family and local law enforcement. Despite this, there was no compelling reason for him to disappear if he had survived. It is generally believed that Brocious could not have survived his injuries, as he was too hurt to escape on his own. Curly Bill's legacy as a cutthroat cowboy outlaw remains significant. Since arriving in Cochise County in 1878, he became known for his leadership of the Clanton Gang, his suspected involvement in Morgan Earp's assassination, and the mystery surrounding his death. Despite being a horse thief and a desperado, Curly Bill's story is a crucial part of the Wild West history.